You're listening to Reporters and Reported, a podcast from Cardiff University's School of Journalism, Media and Culture.
In each episode, brought to you by the MA Journalism students of 23-24, will bring you insights and interviews of the key people in the industry.
We'll examine the challenges, opportunities and threats facing journalism and get tips about the best way to follow a career in the media. This week it's me, Charlotte Wright.
And me, Manon Jenkins, and we're here with Nic Newman from the Reuters Institute for Journalism. Hi, Nic.
Hi, great to be here.
So first of all, could you just introduce yourself and what it is that you do?
Yep, so I mainly look after a lot of the comparative research we do on how people consume the news. So we do this big survey every year called the Digital News Report, which covers 46 different markets, including the UK. And I also do a lot of work on how technology is going to affect the future. So future trends, things like AI and the metaverse and some of these concepts.
Perfect. So first question, what's been the biggest change that you've seen in the industry since you first started doing these digital news reports?
So that's about 12 years ago, and I think the biggest change is really the combination of social media and mobile. So the way in which these new ways of accessing media anywhere, any place, any time, and doing it in a way that is participative rather than purely sort of broadcasting news at people. And I think the impact of that is still being felt, but has really changed the way in which we think about journalism, the way it's distributed, the way the business models and advertising works as well.
That change, did it feel sudden or did it feel like it was slowly coming on, the change from broadcast into more of a social media-based news platform?
It was pretty slow. I mean, I was involved in the start of the BBC News website in 1997, and it was like a little start-up in the attic and nobody paid any interest. And then sort of gradually every year it became sort of more important. None of the correspondents wanted to appear on it or do anything for it. And then sort of 3 or 4 years later, suddenly the numbers started to shift. They started to use the internet themselves. And then I think, you can notice other milestones. For me, I think the arrival of the iPhone I think it was 2007, was just, wow, I can see the future. The way in which this device brings together mobile always-on communication and a screen that allows you to read stuff, view stuff, look at pictures and videos, all in one really convenient package. And that, it's always been so interesting to me how technology and content come together in ways that, and when you see it, and the iPhone was the moment for me.
So from your lecture, you mentioned about news avoidance and people saying that they want more positive news. Well, how do you find the balance between publishing news that people want to read versus news that they need to be reading?
I think this has always been a challenge. It's just very hard for us as human beings to take in a relentless diet 24 hours a day coming at you from all angles. And I think that's one of the things that's changed with social and digital is, previously the news would be terrible, but it would happen once a night at 9 o'clock or whatever. And now it's just happening all the time. But I think the balance, the balance is really important that, and it's really hard to achieve in digital because if you go through social media, it's often just one bad thing after another. The algorithm just gives you more of what you've read before. I think from a journalistic point of view, it's not about replacing critical, difficult journalism with positive news stories. In fact, journalists just fold their arms when you talk about positive news. I think it's much more about solutions or constructive approaches to the news actually than positive. Even though people say they want positive news, what they really mean is that they want news that gives them a bit of hope or inspiration or gives them hope essentially. And in many ways what we do as a journalist is we have this very sort of critical and negative lens we put on everything, and it's not necessarily a true reflection of what's happening in the world. We select things that are going to sell newspapers or going to drive audiences and engagement, and increasingly as the mission of what we're here to do, which is to inform people in as clear and fair a way as possible, sometimes gets subsumed by that.
Yeah, so going off of that, where do you think the news will be in a few years' time in terms of, obviously will AI have a role in the future of news? How is it going to progress in a few years?
I think, like we talked already about how many of these changes are kind of incremental, but they're also come in jumps and starts. And I think in many ways in a few years' time, the news will look quite similar to how it does at the moment, and people will grumble and complain about it in exactly the same way as they do already. What I hope will happen is that we will better balance what audiences want, which is fair, accurate, balanced coverage of important news stories, critically done, and providing, as I say, some more of that hope and inspiration. And I know there's a lot of media companies really trying to close that gap between what audiences say they want and what is currently provided. And I also hope that the news industry will be a bit more sustainable from a business point of view, because I think part of the reason that it goes chasing clicks is because that's how the internet, how the incentives of the internet have worked. And that is changing because advertising models are becoming less viable, so people are looking more at sustainable reader revenue models, which I think probably push a bit more towards quality.
And we had quite an interesting chat in the lecture about there's certain trends that have been changing over the years, like from traditional to digital, and we brought up whether or not some of these trends might reverse. So do you think there will be any trends going back to sort of more traditional forms of news, or do you think digital is now the future?
I think what digital has done is sort of just given you all these possibilities to look at any subject. And we've all become a bit overwhelmed by that, and actually this idea of the edition, the thing that gives you a carefully curated, whether that's a newsletter, a podcast, a website. I think there's a possibility that will come back, or at least for some people. It certainly has for me. I mean, I've started buying a newspaper again. I'm so overwhelmed by perspectives that one of the things I do is I've gone back to buying a printed newspaper, which I thought I would never do.
Retro.
Yeah.
Very retro. But you also see young people being retro and stuff and doing that kind of thing as well. So not many young people, but some.
But some, yeah.
Yeah, and young people as well are the biggest audience when it comes to podcasts like this. Why do you think that is?
Proportionally, yeah. So they're more likely to be interested in audio and podcasts. I think it's partly because of smartphones. They grow up with smartphones. They're always on. They've got headphones in all the time. And so it really fits into their lifestyle. And also younger people are out and about a lot more. Mm-hmm. So there are those moments when you're traveling or going to meet friends or whatever, and a podcast fills that gap really nicely. Audio, I started in radio. Audio is just an amazing medium, isn't it? And it's a great way to take in information, to be entertained, and I think podcast is definitely one of the bright spots in terms of growth, but also in terms of business models as well, and innovation, I think, as well.
Yeah, talking about business models and podcasts, do you think it's a better way to advertise if you're going to be an advertiser to advertise on podcasts, as opposed to doing it like the Mail Online do on their website? Yeah.
I think it's less difficult. So it on the whole, up until now anyway, ad density in podcasts has not been a big problem, and often it's been quite well integrated into the podcast. And it's much more akin to radio, where you have there's a clear separation between the ad and the content, whereas within a digital page, it's just a mess. Mm-hmm. It's a horrible mess of user experience. Always has been on desktop, and it's even worse on mobile. And the ad density, because they're desperate for money, is appalling. So essentially the ads are putting people off. So yes, the audio experience currently is a much better proposition, though they have been increasing the ad density on podcasts as well, which is not so good.
Yeah, so if we could quickly just round up this podcast, could you give me your best tips for journalists trying to start out in the industry?
I think that's a difficult question to answer because it depends what you want to do. So, I suppose the answer is be clear what you want to do. And some of that is also really hard when you're starting out because you want to stay flexible, right? Mm-hmm. So, obviously be curious. I think it's good if you, like when I started, I loved audio and radio. So, I was almost driven by wanting to study, listen to role models in the media that I really loved in terms of radio and try and emulate what they did. And I learned a lot just from doing that, and then going to meet some of those people and ask questions of those people about what they enjoyed and how they got into the industry. So follow your passion. I appreciate not everyone has that sort of very clear clear view that this was their starting point. But I think that sense of curiosity, I think being rooted in the values of what journalism should be, and being really clear about that, and then you can express that in a million different ways and formats. But fundamentally, being fair, being curious, having a nose for a great story, all of those things. Pursue those things.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for coming to chat to us today, and thanks for your lecture.
Pleasure.
This was the Reported and Reporters podcast, brought to you by CGS News.